McCann.
Thank you very much, Mr Davies. And can I start by saying that I endorse everything that's been said by the Honourable Member for Gordon and in his position as the Chairman of the Select Committee. Mr Davies, over Christmas New Year I started reading the Max Hastings tome, All Hell Let Loose, The World at War, 1939 to 1945, and in his introduction he explains that one of the most important truths about war, as in all human affairs, is that people can interpret what happens to them only in the context of their own circumstances, and the fact that objectively and statistically the sufferings of some individuals are less terrible than those of others elsewhere in the world, it's meaningless to those concerned. And I think the same logic can be applied in the case of India and aid. As a relatively new member of the Select Committee, India was my first overseas experience, and since then the committee has visited DRC, Rwanda, Burundi and, in December, South Sudan. And it's whilst visiting these places that the relativities of poverty strike home. In New Delhi, we visited a slum of third-generation Bangladeshi immigrants, where children as young as 2 and 3 were rummaging through bins to find waste to recycle. They were paid £1 for a kilo of glass. The community had hooked in dangerously and, needless to say, illegally to the electricity supply with some of the most primitive devices that I've ever seen. Whilst in Burundi, the prospect of electricity for a local community is a pipe dream. Therefore, people must interpret what happens to them in the context of their own circumstances, which is why, in my opinion, India must be placed in context. 1.2 billion people, 400 million people who live on less than $1.25 a day, 800 million people living on less than $2 a day. And I'm pleased that the Government and the Select Committee are not far apart on their assessment of India, which has been poured through in some detail by the Chairman of the Select Committee just a few moments ago. But I'd like to take the opportunity to highlight just 3 issues from the report. Sanitation, which has already been covered, private investment and discrimination and social exclusion. On sanitation, the Government agrees with the Select Committee's view, and the Honourable Member for Gordon has already mentioned Bihar. We split into 2 groups. One visited Bihar and another visited Madhya Pradesh. I didn't visit Bihar, but when we all joined up together, again when we went back to New Delhi, we discussed each other's experiences. Bihar, a state of 90 million people, where public defecation is routine, and in some parts of the state, toilets are available, but people still choose not to use them because they consider the toilets to be unhygienic. And, as again has been mentioned already, water supplies beneath the ground are contaminated by minerals, whilst above ground supplies are contaminated by waste. I am therefore pleased that the Government agrees with the Select Committee's view that the emphasis has to change from health to water and sanitation, because, put simply, poor sanitation is creating a huge number of health problems in the country. On social inclusion or exclusion and discrimination, despite the fact that untouchability was outlawed in Article 17 of the Indian Constitution, it is sadly very much alive and well. In Madhya Pradesh, we visited a Dalit village and had the opportunity to speak to women and girls, and we asked for examples of discrimination, and 2 were offered immediately. Manual scavenging, which has been outlawed, is still rife, and for anyone who doesn't know what it is, it's where people who are in lower castes have to carry the night waste from people who are in a higher caste, and they're paid £8 per month per household. And the one lady we spoke to explained that she carried out this task for 100 houses, and it led to skin infections, and it led to her miscarrying her children. And that's the evidence that was presented. Another piece of evidence by a young girl who, because of her undernourished state, looked about perhaps 6 or 7, when in truth she was about 13, explained that she'd went to season her food for a meal she was having at school, only to be told by the teacher to stop, and she wasn't allowed to season her food and put her hand in the same salt as other children. And when she pluckily replied, "I'm a human being too," the teacher said, "This is the teacher. No, you're not," which is utterly extraordinary and demonstrates the discrimination that still is alive and well. So there is much work that needs to be done there, and again, as the Honourable Member for Gordon has explained, it's good that recognition of that is contained both within our report and in the government's response. Can I now move on to the third element, which is the government's private sector investment policy? And I have to declare, Mr Davis, that I am a sceptic. I agree wholeheartedly that jobs and growth take people out of poverty, but I remain unconvinced about the DFID approach. And can I draw members' attention to paragraph 75 of the report, where I, in an evidence session, asked the Secretary of State for more details about how this investment was going to take place, and he replied, and I quote, "You do not have to have a prescriptive line on this." I disagree. This is British taxpayers' money that we're spending, and it's the Select Committee's job to ask the difficult questions, and it's the Secretary of State's role to provide the answers, and they couldn't provide the answers as the record demonstrates. The government's formal response puts a little more flesh on the bone, but not that much. And again, like the Honourable Member for Gordon, I would like the Minister to perhaps give us more detail on what investments will take place, because when we were in one of the villages in India, we met a woman who had bought a buffalo through a microfinance project. She had bought another buffalo, and she had paid off the loan, and she said to her work-shy husband behind her that now he thinks it's his business, which I think demonstrates that those types of subtleties take place across the globe. But that much money that the government are proposing, half of the programme to go into private investment, we have to be told how that investment is going to take place, because everyone can't buy buffaloes to provide milk for the local communities and to repay loans and to provide that private sector investment. So I remain sceptical, but let me also say that I'll be delighted if I can be proved wrong. In conclusion, Mr Davis, there's a widespread recognition that the development relationship with India has to change, but I would most definitely urge caution. The Daily Mail would have us believe that the Indian government is building space shuttles, which is certainly not the case. In truth, the satellite technology that they are using is more about putting in place communication systems for their vast country, not space exploration. We know that India is a nation of extremes, wealth and poverty, and as we experienced, freedom and oppression. But there's one issue we mustn't forget, and that is if we believe that the Millennium Development Goals are the benchmarks on which we will eradicate global poverty, then India must be a part of the solution. With 400 million people living on less than $1.25 a day and a further 800 million people living on less than $2 a day, it means that unless India is part of the solution, we're not going to achieve those goals. And on that cautionary note, I would end my contribution to the debate. Thank you.